get started. I'm really glad to see everybody here for our very first episode, instance. I'm going to call it an episode of the Right Mind series. We are going to talk about writing. We'll talk about publishing. We'll talk about what it takes to go from that draft you thought was finished to the book that's out on Query and on Sub and now on a shelf. We'll talk about all that stuff and juggling ways to make sure that you have a life in all of that too. Uh, uh, Megan makes faces. Um, so welcome to the Right Mind. I want to welcome Megan Jaregui Eccles. She lives in the foothills of San Diego, is a writer, poet, professor, and former publishing professional. Her gothic fantasy novel, Sing the Night, through Eighth Note Press, explores the ambition of and grief of being an artist and debuts in fall 25. When she's not rehoming rattlesnakes, she plays Dungeons and Dragons with her 5 sons and hatches a variety of poultry. She holds an MFA in fiction from UCR Palm Desert. Please welcome Megan Jaregui Eccles. Yay.
Hello! I'm so excited to be here with all of you and to talk about writing and publishing. And I don't know about the work-life balance. I haven't figured that out yet, but I'll tell you what's not working for that. And yeah, I'm really excited to be here.
We're glad you're here, and I'm excited to see everybody that's come into the room. I'm going to throw you a curveball because we have some questions that we've talked about, but I'm dying to know what exactly is the wide variety of poultry? What have you got going on?
I currently have turkeys, Muscovy ducks, normal chickens, special chickens because they are miniature. They're the smallest chickens in the world. They're called saramas. I've done quail. We don't have quail right now, and I have done peacocks, but the peacocks tend to just like leave and fly away. So that hasn't worked out super great for
Yeah.
peacocks at the house.
That is a crazy amount of birds.
A lot of birds. You may hear them because my office is right outside my chicken coop. So
That's crazy. That's great. All right. Well, let's dig in. First, congrats on Sing the Night.
thank you.
I know that's been a journey for you.
It
Uh,
has.
and now that you got that deal in place, did that process end up being what you expected? Talk us through how that book came to be, and then with the journey that you've gone through with that book.
So I first came up with the idea. I mean, if you are a Phantom of the Opera girly, you know, I had been thinking about doing a retelling because I find the original story to lack agency for Christine. She's just kind of pushed and pulled by the plot, and that has always bothered me. And so I came up with the idea in 2018. I initially pitched it when I was on submission with my former agent to an editor who had passed on a manuscript of mine but wanted to know what I had next. She was super interested, so I got writing. In the meantime, I left my literary agent and then queried with Sing the Night. It was called Stranger Than You Dreamt back then. And if I pull up an example query letter, you will see it used to be called Stranger Than You Dreamt, but my current agent was like, that is a stupid title, do better. And I was like, okay. I queried that. I ended up getting 3 R&Rs, which is a revise and resubmit from literary agents within the same week. That all said the same thing. So I decided to stop querying, revised the manuscript, sent out that new round. And when I sent out the new round, I found my current agent, Lauren. She requested the book within 3 days, read it, offered in less than a week. I ended up with multiple offers on the book for a literary agent. But I signed with her because right away I was like, you are my literary soulmate. I don't want to work with anyone else. Then we got to editing. It took about 9 months to do 3 rounds of developmental edits with her, and then we went on submission. And for submission, that's where the literary agent sends the book to editors. We got a ton of really enthusiastic responses, and then nothing. The rejections that came in were all like, "This is great. Your writing is great. Send me the next book. I don't like Phantom of the Opera." Which, first of all, how dare you? Second of all, that's just how it is. And so we were on sub with that book for a year and a half. In the meantime, Eighth Note Press, which is owned by ByteDance, who owns TikTok, created a press as a result of the success of Book Talk. And we sent to them, and they offered within 3 months of sending the book to them. And we signed with them because the marketing power of behind ByteDance is basically unparalleled. And so, yeah, now I'm just in the waiting processes, and the book comes out this fall.
Right on. That's a lot of there's a lot of time that you've defined there, 9 months for editing, a few months for requerying, and then a really rapid jump from there to sale. Can we talk about the amount of time before your first agent, or even the time with the agent? I'm curious about why you would leave an agent, and first how you got to that one, and then why you would leave.
So, my first agent I signed with in 2015. It was kind of a whirlwind experience. It was my MFA thesis. I ended up with three offers from different literary agents in like 9 days. It's will never happen to anyone ever again. It was such a quick process. And I had two agents who had a vision for the book who were really chill. And then I had this other agent who was quite frankly the scariest agent in the biz. She represented Pulitzers. She had her awards list was insane, and the fact that she was interested in my book was crazy. And she told me she had a lot of edits for the book, and that I should sign with someone else if I didn't want to do the work. And instead of feeling like a partner, she felt like a scary boss. And at the time, I thought that's what you should have as a literary agent. And so I signed with her, which was, I learned a lot in that experience, but a huge red flag for me was her reading times. It took her 6 to 9 months to get back to me on the book for edits. Yeah. Which is frankly too long. It someone is sitting on your career. So we edited the book several rounds. She didn't give me like concrete notes. She often would just tell me like this part needs meaning, and I would say, "What does that mean? What do you mean by meaning?" And she goes, "You know, meaning." And so I kept editing and editing and editing and trying to get it to whatever she was looking for, which again took 3 years. And then we went on sub. And the other problem I had with her is she didn't respond to emails at all. She only responded to phone calls. And if you heard my bio with all of those children, phone calls are not a great time for me because of the children and also because I am a millennial and talking on the phone is akin to death. Um, and so the communication between us was a really, really challenging, to the point where like she would give me line edits, but she would do them over the phone. So she'd be like, on page 47, 3 lines down, you need a comma. And so that whole process was stressful, but I didn't know any better. I was a baby writer. And so we went on sub and went out to everyone, and it was a really cool process, except she assumed that I was going to get a preempt from HarperCollins. And when the book didn't sell in 3 weeks, she completely ghosted me.
Oh
Like,
my,
yeah, it wasn't a great experience. And did not speak to me for 3 months, didn't respond to phone calls, emails, anything. I knew someone who was also a client, and he was like, she's talking to me. I don't know what's happening. And then when she finally got back to me at the end of that summer, she said that my book not selling quickly made her so depressed that she couldn't talk to me. Yeah, very gaslighty. It wasn't great.
yeah.
So at that point, I knew that I needed to leave, and I started to write a new book, which ultimately that it wasn't Sing the Night, but that new book I did query and I didn't land with an agent. And so, but once I started querying that book, I immediately started working on Sing the Night, and then the rest moved forward. But it was really scary to leave behind a literary agent, especially a literary agent with the connections and prowess of my first agent. But I'm so, so glad that I did because she just wasn't a good fit for me. And there is no agent is better than an agent who is a bad fit for you. So definitely find someone who's not a scary boss, but is instead someone who feels like a partner in publishing.
I think that's a big deal.
What? Oh,
Um, So what I'd love to do, and I've been meaning to mention this. I'm keeping an eye on the chat. If we have questions we want to throw them in the chat. I'm happy to bring them up. Let's get that cracking because I'd love for this to be a larger conversation. I want to ask two quick questions though. We've got a couple of industry terms that have come out on
we-
sub and preempt.
yeah.
Uh, Help us out.
Okay, so when you are on sub, that's being on submission. That's once you have signed with a literary agent, your literary agent will submit the book to a very select list of editors at big publishing houses. So that is something that you lose control of and let go. And then a preempt is when a publisher wants your book so badly, they are going to say, we get it first, no one else can offer. We are going to give you this X amount of extra money to prevent it from going to auction. And so that's our friend Liska Jacobs. Her first book deal was a preempt. So they gave her extra money so that no one else would touch it.
Yeah, Lisa Jacobs, it's Catalina and The Worst Kind of Want. Those are the two she's got out. I think she's got something else
Um,
cooking.
and and the Pink Hotel came out,
Oh,
and
and
she
the
has
Pink
another book
Hotel too.
coming. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clearing all that up. Appreciate that. Don't forget questions in the chat. We want to hear them. The next thing I want to get to, and this is going to be pretty specific to the writerly experience, I guess, given your experience at Hill Nadell. First, describe for us what your responsibilities were, and then I want to talk about what you saw there as the path for writers and kind of highlight some differences that happen for other writers that happen with you. And the reason I want to talk about this, I don't want to, I'm not looking for doom and gloom. I think the idea here is that this doesn't look the same for anybody.
Yeah.
And the only difference between the published and the not published is those who kept going and those who stopped. And this is a demonstration of that. So I'd love to hear about, what your experience at Hill Nadell, what you saw there, and
Oh, you froze.
kind of set up.
Uh,
I
so
swear I'm still here.
yeah, you froze for a second, but I think I've got the gist. So, um, I worked at Hill Nadell first as an intern and then as an assistant to the literary agent Dara Hyde, who is a powerhouse. She's absolutely wonderful. And in my role as an assistant, I manned her query inbox and the agency's query inbox, which meant during my time there, I read 30,000 queries. It was a lot of queries. Yeah, it's too many queries. And in addition to that, I offered editorial notes, developmental edits, and line edits for her clients. I put together submission lists. I helped her put together pitches. When something sold, I helped put together the copy that would go to publishers marketplace. I also was the head of marketing when I was there, so I did all of their newsletter. I did all of their socials. All of that, which was the purpose of that was less to like get to readers and more to connect to foreign publishers, foreign agents, film, and all of that. The big thing, like 30,000 queries is a lot. It is a lot. The big thing you need to know is that we read we, all of us who were there, I read every query with the wild, improbable hope that I was going to find something that was going to knock my socks off. And even if it wasn't going to knock my socks off, I was looking for something that was sellable, that was something that we could do something with. And the reality was, most of those queries were uh, not researched, not completed manuscripts, not anything that could be done with. Probably about 10% of queries were for finished polished books where the query was clear and the opening pages were clear. So if you, and they followed the query guidelines. So if you just follow the query guidelines, you are already at the top of the pile. The rest, making sure your manuscript is polished, making sure your query is polished, all of that then goes to taste. I can tell you there was one book that I think about almost every day still. And we both read it. We both read the full manuscript and realized like this is something so special. This is something so good. And also we did not know how to sell it. We did not know how to position it in the marketplace. We didn't know who to sell it to. And so even though this book was so great, it was not the right fit for the agency. And that's not to discourage you. That's to help you understand that if somebody is rejecting you, it's not because you're not good. It's not because the book isn't good. It's often because their personal taste and experience do not align with it. Um, and yeah, we just really, really advocated for writers. We had so many clients who were just knocking things out of the park. And I think that's the other misconception is that literary agents sit around all day and read their query inbox. And the reality is they do not. I was the assistant. I read the query inbox. And then I would forward anything that was super, super great that I had already read and vetted to the agent I worked for, because she was putting out fires, dealing with foreign rights deals, reading client manuscripts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the work that she did had very little to do with looking for the next great writer, which is why she had me there. And that's what you want. You do not want an agent who is ignoring their clients so that they can find someone new. You want an agent who is fighting for you. And that's what she did.
Uh, and here we are, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's great. Okay, so I we have several questions in the several questions in the chat. I can answer Tina's question. What publisher? This was Hill Nadell was the agency,
Hmm.
right? So it was an agency. And then I see questions from Kit and Vicky and Annabelle. And I'd like to kind of squeeze those in to the conversation where they're where they kind of naturally fall. And I think Kit's works well now for a first time writer. Do you write a book before starting to think about an agent, or do you need to think about it earlier in the process?
Your most important job is to finish writing the book. Do not even think about literary agents until you have a completed first draft. I really believe that you should write your first drafts with the door closed and then edit with the door open. If you are thinking about market and agents and all of that while you're writing the first draft, you're going to slow yourself down. Just enjoy the story, make the story what you want it to be before you start worrying about the rest of the world.
Right on. Thank you for that. And I promise I will get these in there. And I think this kind of leads to Vicky's question a little bit. But I want to talk about this. I want to talk about the ways a writer can control moving from slush, the query slush to an agent's desk. And I think that leads us into talking about the query letters, which then will get us to Vicky's question about self-publishing.
Yeah, so once you've finished and polished a manuscript, you want to make sure it is the best you can make it on your own. And hopefully by this point you've had beta readers, you have had critique partners, so the book is polished. By the time I had Sing the Night ready to go, I read the book and I was like, I don't know what else to do. And then of course I got the R&R and they were like, this is what else you should do. And I was like, you are right. And I did those things. But when I queried Lauren, I had hit a point where I was like, I don't know how to make this any better. Um, and so you in the query, you want to make sure your query is clear, concise, and focuses on the character. This is a mistake a lot of early writers make, especially if they are writing fantasy, is we want to lead with our world because that's what's exciting. That's not what is exciting to a literary agent, and actually that's not what is exciting to a reader. Readers come to story for character and experiencing the world and the plot through character. So if your query letter explains who the character is, what they want, and how they plan to get it, then you have done all you need to do. And remember, this document is about 350 words max. So you have to be tight, you have to be concise. Don't try like tricks, like some people will just load it with rhetorical questions. Or I know Pierce Brown famously wrote his in the character voice. Don't do that. It worked for him. It's not going to work for anyone else. But you want to position your character at the front, and then you basically only write the query up to the inciting incident, and don't spoil the rest of it. You will spoil the rest of it in a synopsis, but not in a query letter. Um, In addition, a query letter is made up of three parts. That is the hook, the book, and the cook. So in your hook, that's where you are going to um, honestly include a personalization. If you don't know why you're querying a literary agent, you shouldn't query them. You should understand why they would be a good fit for you, and you have done your research. You also want to include your completed word count. You cannot query an incomplete manuscript, and include your comparable titles. I'm a huge fan of comps. I think they can really, really elevate a query letter. But do not comp to plot because you're going to give us plot in the book paragraph. So comp to things that are intangible and things that are not in your query, like atmosphere, writing style, world building, magic systems, character arcs, things that we can't otherwise see. And then if you have a great one sentence pitch, you can include that, and then you'll have the book paragraph, which again, character first, and then go to the inciting incident, and then your bio. And you can make your bio fun and relevant, but don't feel like if you don't have a slew of literary achievements that a literary agent will look at you. I read some bios that were just like cute and happy and fun, and that was great because it allowed me to see the writer's personality.
Awesome. Thank you. I want to pop in comp titles. I think the best way to understand that at this stage is if you liked this, you'll love this.
Mhm.
Right. So if you liked the comp title, the story you're comparing to, you'll love my book.
Yeah,
Right.
and the more specific you can be, because we saw a lot of like for fans of Lee Bardugo and Holly Black, and that doesn't really mean anything. We
Yeah.
also saw a lot of X meets Y pitches, and Bridgerton meets Jurassic Park. First of all, if you write that book, please, I want it right now. But it also doesn't necessarily mean anything because that's a pitch, not a comp. So again, if you could say um, a these also, it needs to be a book published within the last 5 years and not something that is like a breakaway hit. So I'm going to use examples that will not work because they are older. But if you tell me that you have a found family heist, like in Six of Crows, with I'm just gonna look at a book in my office to see, with a uh a deadly school like Naomi Novik's Deadly Education, then you have comp to something specific that I can follow and get excited about. And actually, my comp is what got my agent to read the book. I very, very boldly comped my writing style to The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. And then I also comped to the atmosphere of House of Salt and Sorrow by Erin A. Craig, and that's what got my agent to request. She was like, "I love the Night Circus. Like, please, let's work together." And then she read the whole book, and it was great. So,
I think your answer is also demonstrating that this writing exercise is also it's deeply intertwined, inseparable from a deep reading exercise too, right?
yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you can't just read books that are like classics. You know, if you've only read like classic Russian literature, you're not going to understand how to position your book in the current market.
Yeah.
I really spent a lot of time researching. There was an entire year where I read every single book in the YA category that hit the New York Times bestseller list. It was a very interesting year. And then I also would read every book that was nominated for awards in the categories that I wanted to be nominated for awards, so that I could keep it fresh and be aware of what the market is. That not saying you necessarily have to do that, but reading books that have come out in the last 3 years is really valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think in terms of where you're in the conversation, I think I'm going to pull Annabelle's question. What do you think are some of the biggest green and red flags that agents and publishers consider when choosing which authors and books to take on?
I think the red flags that I personally saw were, and this is stuff that none of you guys are gonna do because you guys are all absolutely normal. Red flags in queries were when the generally a man would talk about how pretty the literary agent was. Do not comment on anyone's appearance. Don't comp your book to the Bible. People say that like it's a joke. It's not. Make sure you are in with the correct word count range for your age range and category. That is one of the quickest ways to be rejected. You simply cannot expect a publisher to take the risk on something like Brandon Sanderson writes, which is 400,000 words, when you are a debut. You have to really keep the book under 100,000 words, and maybe even shorter depending on the age category and genre. Romance is typically shorter. Historical, fantasy, and science fiction tend to be longer. Horror and thriller tend to be a little shorter, etc., etc. You also cannot query typically a self-published manuscript, because what publishers are interested in is those first print rights, and you've already used them. However, we are seeing a ton of successful indie books get picked up by publishers, but those are books that are selling like 5, 10, 20,000 books a month. I really believe that you have to approach publishing like the rule and not the exception. And so being aware that like if you want to get picked up by a traditional publisher, you go the traditional path. You don't do indie in hopes that you'll get picked up. Um, uh, Having horrible things on your social media, by the way, we checked your social media before we offered on anything, was also a horrible red flag. Green flags were again clean, clear, concise prose, a good query letter. And we did like to see that you had social media, but your following doesn't matter, unless you are writing a very specific type of nonfiction. But for an author, we weren't worried about you having a gazillion followers. As it turns out, followers do not translate into sales, which we learned with Justin Timberlake when his book was an absolute flop.
So there is something that he does not do well, is what
Yeah,
you're saying. Yeah.
correct. Yes.
That gets us to that kind of leads us to Vicky's question about self-publishing, and I've been thinking about self-publishing being distinct from indie, and that indie being small press, privately like in-house these little guys like Max Booth in San Antonio, with Ghoulish and that kind of thing. I've been thinking about self-publishing and indie being separate things. Am I wrong in that?
You aren't wrong, but they are used interchangeably because
Okay.
indie authors and indie presses get mixed.
Okay.
And it has caused a lot of confusion. There's actually been a lot of discussion about this lately on Threads, which happens to be the bad place. So if you are avoiding that, continue to avoid that. But independent, essentially, when you become an indie author, though, you are committing to be an independent publisher. You are just publishing yourself. And the big thing to note is that there is typically a different readership between people who read a lot of indie books and people who read a lot of trad books. It is a different audience. It's changing a little bit thanks to Book Talk, but generally, the type of people who go and pick their books up from Barnes and Noble are not the same people who are reading things on Kindle Unlimited. Also, there are specific genres that do very, very well with self-publishing, and there are ones that do not. If you are writing smut, erotica, romance, certain types of horror, those do very, very well on indie. But if you are writing anything that is more literary or anything that's for children, it is simply not gonna work in the indie markets. Historical too, I've noticed has been a hard sell on indie. But like paranormal romance, if you have shifters, Omegaverse, whatever that is, you can do indie and you will make so much money. Um, but I think you have to be aware of what you're getting into. I've gotten asked a lot, especially because I've been doing this. I've been working. I signed with my first literary agent 10 years ago. So this has been a very long path for me. And I get asked a lot, well, why didn't you just do indie? And the number one reason is I do not want to be the publisher. That is so much work. I get stressed like picking peaches out in the grocery store, like with decision fatigue, making sure the peach is right. I don't want to be responsible for the cover and for the cost of all those things. If you are doing self-publishing, you are the publisher, which means your upfront costs can be anywhere from $500 to $5,000, depending on what you are paying for. And you really do have to pay for a lot to create a great product. There are great indie books out there. I support indie authors, but that was not the path for me.
I think to speak to that just a little bit longer, I think that the genre being kind of the kicker with erotica, like there's an audience for it, but where they're shopping, it's not that it's a different quality of writing, it's where it's what store the readers are shopping in, really, right? And splatterpunk, extreme horror, bizarro, comedy horror, like that kind of thing works really well because a lot of that appeals to people who aren't interested in what's going on in the mainstream. And if you want to step out of the mainstream, you have to go independent to find that weird in the good way stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. You will also, though, if you're not careful, find the weird in the bad way stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that's really hard about indie is I think there's like a gazillion books published a day. That's an accurate number. And so like making space and being read on there is a lot harder. You definitely have to make sure you have a social media presence and you're finding a way to connect with readers because otherwise it's like a drop in the ocean. It's harder to be found on Kindle because there's so many other authors there. Whereas if you're traditionally published, you are going to have a publisher who is putting your book out and paying for space and paying for ads and making sure you get reviewed, et cetera, et cetera.
Right on. Vicky, I see the second half of your question. I'm going to save that for a little bit later in the conversation. We are going to talk about that. But the genre conversation gets us kind of naturally to, and Blaze, I see yours too, and that I think Megan and I are going to have some particular things to say about MFA programs. But Elizabeth, I wanted to get to yours. Have you written books in multiple genres, and are there differences in trying to get published in those different genres?
Yes, I have written 5 books, and in different genres. They've all been YA thus far, but my next book is adult. Um, yeah, you are going to have to do your research for literary agents based on what you are currently writing, but be aware if you want to write something else, you have to make sure the literary agent represents that. So when I signed with Lauren, I knew that I wanted to break into adult markets, and on that offer call where she called me and complimented me and tried to sell herself to me as a literary agent, I asked her if she was open to doing adult in the future. If she had said no, I wouldn't have signed with her. She is working now to make those connections because she knows my adult book is coming to her inbox sometime this year. Um, I think if you I think if you are planning on writing in a lot of genres, that you should do so strategically and think about not giving your audience whiplash. Because if you go from writing middle grade fantasy to writing like really, really gory horror, you are going to have an audience issue. There are a lot of there are a lot of authors who do navigate that. Kirsten White is one of those. She has written middle grade and YA, and now she is writing like twisty horror. But it is a process to navigate those things. And so at the end of the day, though, story is story, and so learning how to tell story well is the most important thing. But be aware that if you have a publisher who really, really loves your romantic fantasy, they may not pick up your sad, sad literary fiction. And you have to be aware about genre and all of that when you're working on stuff.
Right on. I think I'd like to get back to our list, and then we have the two questions that are still in the chat, and I think I mean we kind of I really want to talk about those. But back to our list, and this will be the last one that we do just from the stuff we had planned on. What advice can you give new writers at the early stages of their writing education, like our students at this community college?
Um, so a couple of things. One is the only way you fail is if you give up. If you want to be in publishing, if you want to publish your work in some way, you have to keep writing because the road is paved with rejections. The road is hard, but the only way you fail is if you stop. So just keep writing, just keep doing. The other thing is finish things. It is really hard for writers who keep editing the first 5, 10 pages to conceive what happens when you actually finish the book. And I truly believe, as someone who teaches a whole novel writing course, the best teacher is you finishing the book. You are going to learn more than any craft book you read, any novel you read, about you and your process because this is so personal. I could give you very specific writing advice that works for me, and it's not going to work for you. So be aware that this entire part right now for all of you is learning how you best write and then making the decisions to move forward with that. And also know that, like, today's book that you're writing, you might have a very specific process that works that does not work for the next book, which is a terrible thing that happens. But be aware and be willing to be flexible and forgiving of yourself when things are hard, and just keep going. You just have to keep going.
Yeah, the keeping going, and it seems like the harder it is to keep going, the more important it becomes because the things that make it hard are the things that make it important to finish,
Yeah.
right? Okay, so I want to get to Vicky's second question. I have an answer for this that I am kind of obligated to give because I teach for the institution that is behind this. I want to hear yours first, though, Megan. Have you been able to effectively incorporate AI into the proofreading and query process?
So I'm going to come on very strong. Know that I say this with a lot of love. Um, AI is built on the scaffolding of stolen work. If you are using AI for any form of writing, that is plagiarism. It is very, very looked down upon in the publishing world. Literary agents, publishers, all of them, authors, take great offense to AI because it is currently completely unethical. There is a huge lawsuit, including some of our friends who are included in that, because AI is built entirely on stolen work. Not only that, if you're talking about generative AI, bad, period. Stay away from it. You are not an author if you are using generative AI. You're a plagiarist. Then, if we move to things like Grammarly and Pro Writing Aid, what that does is it homogenizes your writing. It has scanned all these things, taken an average, and it has made you average. It takes everything that is exceptional about your writing and makes it exactly like everyone else. Yes, it can be helpful, especially for people with disabilities, dyslexia, especially to learn the rules of writing. But the best thing you can do is just learn the rules of writing. There are no magic buttons to skip ahead. And AI, not only is it unethical, it is also destroying the planet. If you've looked into the climate implications of that, and publishing hates it because it is literally hurting everyone who is in publishing. So don't use it. You'll be fine. Don't worry about perfection so much. Worry about telling a great story and figuring out your voice because AI is not your voice. It is not the solution.
I'm actually just gonna add a tiny bit to that. And those of you who are in my classes know that my each one of my assignments has a very clear line for what can be used and what can't. And Megan has kind of said the same thing with uh, with maybe a little stronger backbone to it. Um, but I think that you're right. Like the reason that my assignment sheets say do not let it change your style is because it's not improving anything.
Mhm,
You know, you cannot make with prose you can make a pretty sentence, but nobody but you can make your pretty sentence.
mhm,
And there are pretty sentences everywhere. Yours are the ones we care about, right? Uh, Correcting grammar and Grammarly, two different things. Like an autocorrect for commas, different thing than Grammarly changing a sentence, right? Um, but I'm glad you were able to answer that question, um, because the generative AI is it's tough, and a lot of people don't really connect the source material to the the generative AI. And what's happening is it's not actually creating sentences. What's happening is generative AI recognizes specific patterns, specific tokens in your prompt, and then scans through everything it has access to. And that's the unethical part, is that in a world full of paywalled digital intellectual property, AI skips past that
Mhm.
and searches anything that it can find, and then gives you an amalgamation of responses that look a lot like they would match your response.
We're experiencing huge problems with that right now because people are posting AI books. And one horrible thing that is happening, and has happened to a lot of the 2025 debuts, is people have gone, used the title and the name of the author, and are self-publishing AI derived
Ooh.
books that have nothing to do with the author's book, trying to essentially steal sales. And it's really, really disheartening. Can you imagine, like, you, or I've spent 10 years trying to break into publishing and breaking into publishing, um, for someone to essentially try and steal that from me, with a cheat code is, it's so, it's awful. Also, a lot of the AI is built on AO3, and if you are familiar with some of the stuff in fan fiction, maybe you are, maybe you are not. You know that some weird stuff happens, and be mindful of that. And know that Grammarly is very bad at commas. I can always note when one of my students has used Grammarly because almost all of the comma placement is wrong. Um, I believe in you. I believe that you can learn the rules, and I would rather you see someone put their comma in the wrong place, but have done it themselves.
Yeah, I think something else to note real quick, and then we'll pop. We have two more questions. Something else to note real quick is that that stylistic change
Mhm.
is honestly a whitewashing of the. It's a colonial response. There's all kinds of markers of racial disparity between what AI gives you and what your voice might actually be. So we want to be aware that that's really what's happening, is that it pulls from the dominant discourse, and the dominant discourse is very likely not a discourse that gives you a voice.
Mhm.
Um, okay, so Blaze, I'm going to ask your question last. I want to get to Atina's. What is the discourse like between writers and authors wanting to keep creative work and publishers wanting to change the writing? And does indie publishing have more creative flexibility?
So this is a misnomer about traditional publishing, is that you've sold the rights to your book and therefore they're going to change everything. You don't have to make any changes you don't want to make. If an author receives notes and they say no, um, the publisher can say pretty please, but they can't make the author make those changes. And I often find, as an editor, as someone who has given people a lot of notes, I might be wrong about the fix, but I'm not wrong that there's a problem. And I think as long as you are thinking and addressing the problem, you're still going to publish the book, and they've signed the contract. They're still going to publish the book. But if you are a person, like my friend Darcy Cole, who is a successful indie author, she conceived her YA fantasy series as a 10-book series. She knew what needed to happen in every single book. She might have encountered someone who looked at it and said, I don't think that arc works. I think you should change those things. She didn't want to run that risk, so she decided to do indie so she can maintain create complete creative control over the entire process. But I do not feel as if I have experienced someone taking away my creativity or changing my voice or making the book something that it shouldn't be. Thus far, my developmental edits have been really encouraging, to help me make the book better, to help me make the book clearer to readers. And I think that you can do that, and I think it's going to be great if you want to do traditional publishing.
I was muted. I started talking and I was muted. Um, all right, Vicky, take care. Our last conversation, or our last question, um, is really pertinent to Megan and I talking. Do you feel like an MFA was necessary to build relationships and make connections in the literary world?
Okay, so this might be a different answer than you have, Eli.
Mhm.
But I don't think it was.
Okay.
I think for me, it did it help? Yes. And are the connections that I've made absolutely invaluable? Absolutely. But my literary agent came from outside of that. Not my first one. My first one came through those connections, but
Mm.
I think if you want to get an MFA, if you are interested in boosting the possibility of those connections, which you will, you should get an MFA. If you want to spend time really, really studying your craft, and if you are struggling to find community, an MFA is a great way to do that. But I don't think it's necessary. I think that if you put that same time and energy into learning and going to conferences and coming to chats like this, you're going to make those connections. It just might take longer. The nice thing about our MFA is we were able to do in 2 years what it would have taken me 10 on my own. And then I would not be publishing until 2035. But that's my opinion. What do you think?
Well, I mean, full transparency, when Megan says our MFA, we met, would you believe, uh, almost 10 years ago
I mean,
in our MFA programs. But I agree. Is it necessary? No. You can supply for yourself the education that an MFA would give you, and you can create for yourself the relationships and connections that an MFA would give you. Or you can go to an MFA program, and it's really important that we think about the right MFA program because that's another part of this conversation. If you go to an MFA program that openly talks about the publishing process and makes that part of their pitch to you, then you know that they're going to bring people in to talk to you. They're going to supply you with that with those connections. So, I mean, Megan, you said it. Like, yeah, you can create that for yourself. We were fortunate enough to take advantage of an MFA program whose goal it was to help you find your voice,
Mhm.
uh, and then connect you with publishers, and then the personal relationships are part of that too. Um, my writing group, um, the people I still talked about writing. Um, is out of my MFA program. One of my best friends is out of my MFA program. He's a copywriter in LA. So yeah, you can get the education in your own way, but you don't get to do things like work with Stephen Graham Jones,
Yeah.
who, if you don't know who Stephen Graham Jones is, um, then you're not looking at New York Times bestsellers and you're not looking at publishing news, because we are very close to being too small for him to talk to
Yeah.
at this point. But he's not that kind of guy, so we'd always be able to. But we were able to work with these giants in these industries who helped us, like, the Red MFA program for me was something, it was a place that let me write genre,
Hmm.
and I wrote horror, and I wrote some really bizarre stuff in that program. So yeah, you can get that education, uh, and sure, you could probably do it for less money. But the way I see it, and this is like anything in the world, there are three things: it's fast, it's cheap, and it's good, and you get to pick two of those things. That's it. You can't have all three. And for me, the MFA was fast and fabulous. Not gonna lie, it was not cheap.
It was not cheap.
It was not cheap. That's still a proverbial monkey on my back. So,
Same.
Tina, there will be a recording of this that we're going to house in perpetuity, so that you can come back to this. To sum up, we want to say that query letters need to be clear and concise. They need to be about character. They have the hook, the book, the cook, right?
Yep.
Okay. Don't be weird,
Yeah, don't be weird.
or be weird in the right way.
Yeah, I think the Todd Goldberg phrase is "don't be an asshole"
That's the one.
specifically,
That's the one.
because all writers are weird. You can't help it. You guys
Yeah.
are
We
welcome. We're
and we
weird.
love that about ourselves, but be nice. And that brings us to, do we have any other questions for Megan? Well, that is going to conclude our very first The Right Mind. Thank you, Megan, for being here and talking to us about publishing, about writing. We didn't get to the writing life because that seems appropriate for the response you had when I said we were going to talk about that. And I hope that was helpful. Thank you all for being here, and take good care of yourselves. Have a great day.
Thank you. It was so nice to see you all, and I hope this helped.